First of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Linda LaFleur. Used to be the community liaison with Columbia Basin Trust until about 4 years ago. And then I happily retired after I think 17 years. And I just want to thank Wayne for reaching out to me. I've known Wayne since Valemount because I used to work in Valemount as well. And it was an easy yes that I would come and just get you going with a nice conversation around some issues that are really important right now, but they always are. And so what I can do, what I sort of hinted at Wayne, is part of my background isn't just the trust. I've done other things in the past that have given me a real good perspective on how to handle public property, private property, property management in general, I would say. So if I may, I'll just start out with a little bit of context for myself so that you know what I mean, because it does reflect back into the important work that you're doing. And I got to say, I really am so excited that you're doing it, because having worked in the public sector for so long, it's something that most don't want to step into, this kind of area. But once you do, it's good, you're good to go, and the next council's good to go. And it's a serious bit of work. So I appreciate that you're all together to do it together. So one of the things that so one of my jobs, and I didn't even apply for it, I was asked to do it, and it was managing shopping malls. And I said to them, but I hate shopping malls. I don't step foot in a shopping mall. And they said, well, that's why we want to talk to you about it, because you're a social worker and you might look at our properties in a different way. So I got interviewed, and I was very upfront. I've never been in your mall. Don't go into any of your malls, because I like small independent stores on a main street, no matter where I live. So anyway, they interviewed me, and I thought, I'm going to give it a go. So the things that I learned actually really do work well in a public setting. Because one of the things that you do as managing a shopping mall, and I had 17, after 8 years, I had 17 of them that I had to do the budgets for. And if anybody's ever done something like that, you know the term vacancy loss. And vacancy loss is if you've got, like, the smallest mall I had was 155 stores. And there were 12 vacancies when I was first put into there. So when you do up your budget, you have to show the loss of revenue for those particular spaces. And then you have to make a decision. Do I make the other tenants pay for that? Because within each lease payment for every tenant, they're all triple net, which means all expenses are within that lease. So then if the parking lot was 5 acres, they're now exceeding their payment. They have to now cover the vacancy loss of 12 units, which could increase their annual rate or their monthly bill. So when you're looking at your so-called vacancies, your publicly owned properties, you can see how that kind of mindset can transfer into the public world, where if you don't have enough money coming in to do all the work needed on each property, land. When I say property, I also mean land and physical building property. Somebody's got to pay for that. And I read the article in the paper, very well done. And I think, Tom, you've made a really good comment there about that financial aspect of things. And so, when we all come to that realization, it might be tough one to think about, but it's like that in the private sector as well as the public. So that was one of the key things that I learned, because as a social worker, I was used to writing grants for money to maintain a building, like a group home or something like that. And so this was me with the other foot on, and it's a tough one to do the shift, but it was clearly transferable from one set of knowledge into the other. So I think that's where you're at. And when I first moved here, I remember the chamber was having all these meetings about downtown marketing. And I remember, and I know I put my foot in it, and I said, if you think of yourself as a mall and you start doing things together, you each pay less, but you benefit more. And they're like, no, we don't work that way. I'm like, okay, that's good, but it is quite true. And that's why they did start many years later to come to grasp with how they can do collective and collaborative marketing. So the principles are really interesting to go private to public around property. And not that there's a real similarity, but mall owners, and the ones that I worked for were just single proprietorships. So they were very just wealthy people and they had malls around. But they felt that their accountability was to all the tenants. So when I got the job, I was making sure that not only did I not bring in people to compete with, and you're looking at that issue with your public sector buildings, that not only do you want competition within that building, some is okay, but there's a limit how much you allow. But I didn't also want to destroy the building, businesses downtown, because then nobody benefits at all. So that principle can apply also to your new process of adjudicating proposals for your properties, whatever they are. It's not just direct competition, it's also some indirect issues that you can consider. So we'll deal with those bigger, the criteria issues, but I just wanted to bring forward why Wayne called me, is that I do have these different experiences that has always translated into my public role with public communities. And what's really interesting is that why I actually enjoyed running these malls at the end of the day was because they always had these great common areas. And so I had the discretion to bring in community partners when it suited them, or rather than giving free rent to a vacant space, I could think about non-competing things and that wouldn't drive up the rent of an existing tenant. And I would bring in people like the college. The college would come in and do the registration. And they would pay some rent, but they increased their registration. Or I would have a grad dance in the common area because the school was under renovations. So even the private sector has had to struggle and find a way to avoid some significant issues about who gets what, how much money is going to be saved or not. So private and public with property, you can really see some similarities. Any questions at all? Just pop out and say something, or Linda, you're just nuts.
Carry on.
So I thought that we could just jump into one of the main things that I read in the new non-market leasing building policy. Good document. I can see over time you'll probably do some updates and amendments over time as society changes and what you want as a council and the future councils do. But it's great. So I see we have an audience. And just so you know, when we talk about triple net lease, when we talk about it in the context of buildings, it is every cost. It doesn't include the rent at this point or a lease payment at this point, but it covers everything. And it is taxes, utilities, insurance, maintenance, and repairs. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood what triple net means, because even in a mall setting, people would come in with big dollars, big dreams, and big franchises behind them, but they still didn't know what triple net meant. And it's an important thing to distinguish because it is your way as a tenant of paying your way for everything. Okay, I just thought I'd highlight that. We've got a few people in the audience and some people on the Zoom, and I hope I'm not on camera. I brush my teeth. So good to know. Wayne knows what you see is what you get with me. Sorry. So anyways, there are some guiding principles within the policy. And these are things that internally will be looked at as proposals come in. So we don't have to go into it, but I will just mention it briefly. And that is that this, if it's a nonprofit society, they have to be a registered society with the province, and they have to be in good standing. And I can tell you that every funder that I've worked with, the first thing we do when we do receive a proposal or grant application is we go to the government and make sure that somebody's in good standing. It's the first thing funders do. And I adjudicate grants for the province, the feds, and a few nonprofits in Manitoba. So I've been around. So, okay, and the other part is that good standing, and that the nonprofit, if they're going to submit a proposal, will have to adhere to these 5 key points of criteria. And I think that's where the focus of tonight is going to be, is I want you to jump in. I want to hear comments, questions from Mayor and Council, Wayne, whoever is here, to really understand and come to terms with your role when you receive these proposals for whatever properties you're talking about, that you have the really good understanding of the important issues that all of those proposals will bring forward. And so now, also, we won't dwell on it, but of course, there may be private sector proposals that come forward. And that will be an easier thing to adjudicate because they will be a market rent. And if there's going to be exemptions on or some kind of change to market rent, that will be determined by council. And the only time that ever would come up, I think, with any council would be if the item that the private sector wants to talk to you about is so unique, so diverse that there's nothing available anywhere in your region to provide that new service. So that would be a rare instance, I would say, in our small communities, but that's on the other side. So we're just focusing tonight on how to adjudicate a nonprofit proposal. So there are 5 criteria, and you know, when I started to look into this, the first place I went to was the village's own website. And the village's own website talks about your vision and your mission statement. And I would say that looks like the majority of those words have been translated into the document with the criteria as well as your policy. So that's really good because then it makes it easier for you to adjudicate. You're looking at all proposals with both sets of the right words. And they're really simple because it talks about the expected outcomes, it talks about well-being, but really importantly, it talks about community benefit. So if you like, I'm going to really drill into the meaning of community benefit. I can tell you as working at the trust and adjudicating, especially sectoral, like I adjudicate the federal heritage grants and some of the provincial art grants, it's tough, you know, when you're trying to figure out what that community benefit really is that they've written about in their document. But it's really quite simple. If it's a broad benefit to, let's say, you don't have to do the numbers on it, but if you know in your heart that there might be only 10 people that could benefit from a certain idea that a group has, that would be a very minimal community benefit. But if it was more inclusive and it impacted a broader set of residents, then that leads you to think that's a real good, solid benefit to the community. And if nobody else is offering that service, then you might even score that higher. So there's a lot of factors to community benefits, and I'm really curious what anybody thinks now what a community benefit is. Because it helps if I know what you think now. No takers? Come on, Tom.
Community benefit?
Yeah, what would you, if somebody asked you what a community benefit is? Let's say remember during the COVID and council had to choose the ready grants. And you had to go through all those grants. And you would have had to, and I'm just making this up, I haven't prepped with anybody here beforehand. And you can tell. Put Tom on the spot.
He's the mayor.
Yeah, but, and so council had the dubious distinction of having to review them and help make those decisions. So that was probably the first time you really got stuck to task on that. And it happened in a variety of communities at the time. So the word community benefit was in the application at the time. Now, I'm not asking you to go back a few years and think about that, but just today, what would you think is a good community benefit?
Well, I do remember sitting around that table and it was, well, the RTCK, Area K and the council were all there.
Yeah.
And we had to make decisions.
Yeah.
And because we couldn't do a vote.
That's right.
So the first thing you look at, what is the clear benefit here? How many residents does this serve?
Yeah.
And does it meet the criteria?
Yeah.
So those are
Okay. So were you deliberately trying to imagine then that this is going to benefit, this one project was going to benefit more people than this project?
I think we looked at that.
Yeah,
That would be
okay,
the whole,
yeah,
especially in the positions we were in.
Yeah.
What's the best value we can get out of this for the whole community?
Yeah.
That-
So Tom's hit on a major point that I made, which is the value to the community.
Mhm.
And whenever, well, we all know, and I know, because now that I've retired, I walk 2-3 times a day and I go in different areas. And sometimes I don't want to be seen in public because I get asked all the time about, well, what do you think about the new tax? What do you think about the new garbage bag price? What do you think about? And it's always negative. It's never a positive. So we all know that anytime, there's going to be a cost to the village, we're all going to hear it. So the secret is trying to have it no impact financially on the village in this case, like in this case. How about you? Any feedback at all on what anybody thinks about a community benefit?
I would agree that it's how many residents
Yeah.
are benefited. So, I mean, there is such thing as community benefit for a few,
Mhm.
but if it's at a cost to the residents of the community, I think it has to be, because there's always a cost when you're offering this.
Yeah.
I think it has to be to a large amount of people.
Good. Yeah, and it's a tough one to make a decision on, of course, because sometimes a project will come your way and you'll go, oh, it's only good for 5 or 12 people, but it's such a significant, but then the cost outweighs that, and you have to negotiate sometimes with the group putting on that, whatever that is, to try to make it more manageable financially, and it's not always possible. And when you work for a funder, no matter where, you have to be the person that doesn't care if you're disliked, because you're giving no's. You don't always say yes, you can quite often you have to say no, because it doesn't make fiscal sense. And when it doesn't make fiscal sense, you actually are putting the nonprofit group at risk. It's not just the funder that is going to make a poor decision. It's actually risking the nonprofit's reputation, their ability to move forward on their project. So a lot of factors come in when you think about a community benefit. You'd also want to make sure you're benefiting the nonprofit at the same time and not destroying their capacity, because these are 5-year leases that you're talking about. And even though your agreement that you write with the successful ones would be for 5 years, there's nothing to suggest you wouldn't ask for a yearly report, because then you can analyze that community benefit on a regular basis. Maybe you'll end up saying, you kind of didn't hit the mark, but let's do better next time. And here's some tips, or here's some resources, or whatever. But nobody wants a nonprofit to fail, especially in a small community. So that's why it's really important to be able to identify those benefits, that you're acknowledging the financial risk. If you don't, it's going to cost everybody else.
I guess a question that I have.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the matrix that we're
Yeah.
going to, how do you measure community benefit? Because to one person, community benefit is different than to another person.
That's right. So first of all, before you even, when you're adjudicating the proposals and you're trying to figure that out, you're also looking at, well, how did they come up with this as a project to need? So how did they initiate? Because that'll tell you how you can get them to prove that it is true. So, my habit was, it wasn't just, well, lots of people will just give you a membership list and say, well, look at the members that we have. That says how important it is. Not really. That's nice to have, but it doesn't tell you that the need that they're trying to fill came from a legitimate source. So I think the first thing you do is legitimize the information that you're given, not because you think they're not telling the truth, but because you want to be sure you're selecting the right proposal that's going to have a sustainability and that it really does fill a gap in the community. And when you think about it, there's not that many in Nakusp. I tried really hard to come up with examples of, in your language, in the criteria, it talks about an identified need, gap, and the third word, but, and so how do you do that? And once you determine that system of identifying it, sometimes it's, an impact assessment that they've done independently. It can't just be letters of support. Most funders don't even look at them anymore because they've been misused over decades. It's just like signing a petition in the coffee shop. We all do it because we might support something, but that's really not what works. What works is truly identifying with legitimate means to show the need. And that's how you can determine the benefit and its impact later on. Does that help?
It does help, thank you.
Yeah, because, it's not because we're in a small town, because big cities are exactly the same. Because I've worked in the mall and it's actually harder for us in a small town because we don't have access to all the resources and information. We can get it, but it sometimes costs. But if somebody really wants to do something, they find a way to get that information. So it is out there for most sectors.
I have a follow-up question. to that.
Yeah.
So is it our responsibility as adjudicators or the responsibility of the applicant to prove the legitimacy of the project?
It's a very good question, and I did address it in my notes, and it depends how you write your proposal request. So if you put out a proposal that doesn't ask for things, they don't have to give it to you. And then you will not be fairly adjudicating. So if whatever's important to you to get from them, then you ask for it in the call for proposal. I don't know if you're going to have a proposal meeting or this is it where people learn what is going to be asked of them, but clearly it's in the document itself when you put out the call. So if you would like to have impact assessments, I would put that in. It adds value too. Doesn't mean they all have to, but it will add value if somebody does one, right? So maybe that becomes a scoring point in your new matrix you're going to do. Wayne, there are certain things that not everybody has the capacity to do and to give you, but those who are able and willing to do it, then there's extra value for them. Maybe that's the way to look at that in a small community like this. Yeah, you thought that was a decent question too. That was a
Yeah.
good one.
That was a really good question.
It was,
actually.
yeah. Excellent. Aiden,
I was going to your earlier question, Linda, about community benefit.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it depends on how you define those two words,
mhm,
because I think there's I've heard people say, well, the community, well, what is the community?
mhm.
Is it every resident of Nakusp? Is it the 1,700 odd people that live here?
Mhm.
Is it a subset of that? Is it the 4,000 people that use this as a trading center?
Yeah.
So it's how you define community.
It is, but in this case, because it's the village, it's a local government that's
Yeah.
responsible to the population, whatever that is right now, then I would say the whole community. Because if we go to sectors, then you got a whole other job ahead of you to give Cody and Wayne to go figure out, well, how many people are in the social sector and how many are in the environmental sector?
Right.
You don't even want to go there. You're really thinking about all the people who live here because the ramifications through taxation are all of us.
Mhm.
It isn't just a smaller subsector is I think the important point.
No, and I agree
Yeah.
with you. I've heard people when you say
Yeah.
the definition of community,
Yeah.
because community can be very
Oh, I know.
exclusive.
But I think when you do your proposal call, that you make that really clear.
Okay,
It's not a community of interest, it is the community as a whole.
well,
Because I
then,
think-
in terms of benefit as well, I think
Yeah.
the way that you define benefit is nuanced in terms of who gets what, how much do they need it, how much is it a luxury?
Yeah,
What's the value to, like transit, for example, we spend a lot of money on transit
Yeah.
in the regional district.
Yep.
And it might only help 10 people,
Yep.
but it really helps those 10 people.
Yeah,
So I
for
think
sure.
that as we're working through the matrix,
Mhm.
I think the value, it's not just a 1 or 0 value for benefit.
No, and I think you'll probably see a sliding scale when the province, especially the feds, when they do their adjudication of big grant applications, they always have a sliding scale. So it's not cut and dry. So, for example, a couple of months ago, we were looking at some applications from the Northwest Territories. And they don't get treated any differently because it's a small province with a smaller population. It's still based on the benefit to whoever many people are in that sector or their community. So they all do some sliding scale in a way, and you probably will too. You wouldn't give them a 10, you might give them a 6 or a 7 because it's worthy, but it's not addressing as many people as you'd prefer. So I guess there's that way that you could do it.
Mhm.
I know it's the same way with adjudicating any grants. I mean, I don't want to talk about specifics with the trust, but I mean, we always have to weigh all of those factors. But we also, I mean, I'll never forget having to lobby when in my first 6 months, when we only had 7 million to give out, nothing like that now. And I had to lobby really hard for a community of 275 people. For the one asset that they had, one hall, that they did everything in this one building. And during emergencies, all the people around them. So now the total number was over 1,200. But I still had to fight hard because the application showed it was only servicing 275. I mean, I got them the money, but boy, it was making that point that sometimes the circumstances are such that you have to score higher than what you normally would in a different situation. So I think that could be a part where you do have a little flexibility, but not a lot, because if you're choosing a proposal that only serves a small amount of people, even though it's great work and all those good things, is it fair that the rest of the taxpayers subsidize that? And that's the way you're looking at this, I'm assuming. Because whenever somebody gets something for free with the public purse, whether it be local government level or provincial level, I mean, we're seeing it now with the province. When they cut back on certain projects, housing projects, it snowballs. It's not just that one sector that's gonna hurt, it's gonna be this sector and, it's small business and contracting month, I believe, in April. Well, that's all they're talking about. So every decision snowballs into another. So, those are bigger ways that you look at proposals, but I don't believe they fit in a matrix, that particular point, but figuring out Aiden's issue there is easy to fix, and it's just giving a nice big area to score.
I'm wondering if you could make recommendations as to what we could include, since you've done this a lot of
Yeah.
times when you're adjudicating. What kind of things to recommend to put into the application request in order to legitimize the project? To get that feedback from the applicant?
Yeah, an impact assessment, you mean?
Is there more than just the?
There's more than that,
assessment?
yeah. You can, small groups can do surveys. And as long as they get an outside party to do it,
Mhm.
just like you've got an outside party naming me to come in and talk to you. I'm not driving this conversation. I'm just making sure you guys all have some good understandings and engage around the topic. So if they were to do a third party survey, they're not affiliated, you know, so that you get fresh eyes.
Mhm.
I think in a small town, that would be reasonable. It has to be reasonable, because you can't ask somebody that's asking for a lower rent, a lower lease, to go and spend money ahead of time to prove to you how valuable their work could be. So, generally, they have, if it's a nonprofit that's worked in the area, before, they should have good partnerships. And that's not a letter of support, that's who are they? That's for you to call them if you want to. That's a reference check. And that or a previous client, perhaps, if it's not a confidential line of work, you could ask for that. There's different ways, but you have to be really careful because of privacy,
Mhm.
you know, yeah.
And what other ways did other people, when they were applying to CBT, and this question is to help the applicant.
Yeah.
What kind of things were they able to do to prove legitimacy on?
Okay, so volunteer hours. How many volunteers do you have? And how many hours do they put in monthly? Because it's really important because it shows sustainability. It shows that there's other people that are, you know, bought into that they're attaching themselves to your group. And so number of volunteers, how many hours do they volunteer? Do they offer their volunteers training? This is a really key point, because if you've been volunteering for, let's say, 4 or 5 years with a group, whatever kind of group, and they've never given you any training, you're falling behind all the time, and that's when they start to drop off. You know, they're not learning as they go. So that's another way to put value to that information that you're asking for. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah, it's really, you know, the volunteer component to a nonprofit is key. If it's just a board of people, a few people on a board of directors, and they don't have any volunteers, then you gotta ask, how come? Then if you're gonna do all this work, how are you gonna get that done if you don't have any volunteers? Because you can't be giving free lease or rent, whatever words you'd like to use, and then have somebody just pay themselves to do it. If there's no volunteers, then they're gonna have to pay somebody to do whatever it is they wanna do, you know? And that could be part of it, but not all of it. You know, that's a really big thing in adjudicating grants, is looking at the revenue stream right away and trying to figure out what is the most important, because it always shows up. The staff wages are the number one priority. It's not the impact costs. Sometimes it's the first thing is the wages. And that's okay in a grant application,
Mhm.
you know, because then they're being decided on in a different way. But if you're talking about a use of public tax money for wages, or whatever it is, then that's different. That's a little more challenging to work through.
Mhm.
Because that wouldn't be a community benefit.
Can I ask a
Aiden.
question? You said earlier, Linda, that you need to legitimize the information that's given.
Mhm.
So, and then and just a moment ago, you said that, you know, you need to have volunteers and volunteer hours. How do you legitimize this? Because we've heard some numbers thrown around that are likely untrue. But how do you make sure that
Well, I
they're not
think,
inflated?
yeah. Well, first of all, it's awful when people do inflate them. It is. And there are some regulars within any place that do it all the time. And so funders figure that out real quick. But there are some who have figured out how to do it really well. And there's a group in Caslow. And I've never seen anything quite like it until I met them. And maybe it's because the head of the volunteer crew, he must come to work with a whip, because it's amazing what this guy, and he used to be a banker with the Royal Bank, so he didn't grow up walking around with a whip, you know? And so he would have these work parties that would show up to do the work, whatever it was. And they'd all have to sign in, name, just like when you sign in to vote. You sign in, date, check-in time, check-out time, and signature. And most folks will not go all the way to a work site, wherever it is, to falsify that they were there.
Mhm.
Most people will not do that. It's like checking in with the old school, you know, like our parents would check in with the card in a machine, and you'd have your buddy do it if you got drunk the night before. You know, that doesn't happen. Most folks do not do that. So I think that's an easy way. But you know, it's too late for them to do it now for this, whenever you do the proposals. But it's something I would highly recommend,
Mhm.
is a way for them to make sure that it's legit for sure.
Mhm.
I mean, it's part of a larger question, I think, about the legitimacy of the information that we
Yeah.
may or may not be given.
Well, it happens with grant applications. You're gonna see it with the ready grants every year. You're gonna see it every time there's a grant. It's, everybody tries to present themselves in the best light as possible. And do things get stretched? Of course they do. But there's, you know, that's why phone calls to people that aren't affiliated, like do a reference on,
Mhm.
and sometimes putting people on the spot. I used to do that all the time. That's why I read a book called Doesn't Matter If You're Not Liked. I have it if anybody wants to borrow it. Because it's not why, that's not why you run for council. It's not why, it's not why
I
you
found
work.
that out.
Yeah, it's not why Wayne runs around and with a
Mhm.
CAO hat on, and it's not why you're there. You're not there to be liked. You're there to govern and do
Mhm.
good work. And the same thing with nonprofits. So, you know, it's hard, Aiden. It is, because you kind of know in a small town, especially, that, you know, you've never really seen that many people. But at the same time, you haven't been there the whole time to see how many people.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one. So I always say, just like their budgets are usually 20 to 30% inflated, so's their volunteer numbers.
Okay, thanks.
If they can't track it, if they can't give you the tracking, like the signing in sheets, which for some that's over the top, but for some it works.
Mhm.
For some it works. The bigger projects that they do, you know.
But it could be a request for the future.
Could be a request for the future, could be some way that improves it's always improving them. It's not just getting the best deal for the village and the
Mhm.
taxpayers. It's also strengthening the capacity of the nonprofit itself. You know, because they'll get a yes, they'll get a no, whatever grants people apply for. But the whole point is you learn as you get a no, you learn, and the next one you get a yes, or
Mhm.
hopefully down the road you get a yes. It's not a no forever. Because that's the whole goal, is to build their capacity.
Mhm.
So if you, coming back to your question, Aiden, if you really know that that's not true, then you give them a pass, I guess.
Mhm.
Because you have to be able to, trust that you're signing a lease with good intentions.
Mhm.
But I don't think you're gonna find too much of that. When people realize how important it is, most folks don't do that.
Mhm.
I'm trying to keep this at a reasonable amount, so it's 7:10, basically. So have we covered the benefit part of this criteria? Because it really has to be the maximum benefit
Mhm.
to the taxpayers,
Yeah, so the greatest benefit.
the greatest benefit, the
And-
maximum benefit.
Greatest
You brought
benefit
up-
to the most people.
Well, the maximum benefit to the residents.
To taxpayers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who you're accountable
To the
to.
most of the to more taxpayers.
To all of them.
Yeah.
Whatever decision you make, it's the maximum benefit to everyone that lives here and pays taxes. The community benefit is the benefit, you know, how much of the benefit is in the community.
Mhm.
So, you know, is it enough that you'll see an impact? You know, some projects, you don't see an impact. It's subtle, it's quiet. It's there and you have to go looking for it. But there's always a way to get it, always. Somebody's got to track numbers. If somebody's getting a grant to do a social project, then they're tracking numbers. They have to. And there's just lots of issues, privacy issues and things like that, but they're still having to track for their funder. So they can give you a summary without any information. You know, they're not gonna give you that kind of in-depth information, but they can give you the numbers that they're giving their funder. That is very helpful if you're dealing with a proposal that deals with the social sector. Because don't forget that for them to be able to operate as a nonprofit, they're getting money from somewhere to do whatever they're doing.
Mhm.
So, you know, in your case, you're looking at social, this is on your own website, social, economic, and environmental. Those are your three key objectives in your mission statement. So all three of them they're all getting funding from somewhere to operate, to do whatever they're doing in your buildings and land.
Yeah, so you brought up two items, sustainable and partnership.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that'd be a key to partnerships.
Partnerships are really key. It's not listed in your criteria, so you can't be too firm on that because it's not in the criteria in your bylaw, in your policy. But you can attribute value to it when you adjudicate. It can be that piece that gives you extra points or however, because you can break down these criteria pieces into those subtle and, you know, because those are just general statements. So, yes. Because that automatically gives you a reference to call
Yeah.
as well, because you're entitled to do that. You know, funders do check references all the time. So, I mean, this one you have to get right because you're accountable to all the taxpayers, right? So, yeah. So those are two good points.
One more question regarding
Yes.
references. Is it references that they offer forward or is it references that we see of people who have participated?
It depends on how you want to write your call for proposals. If you decide as a council that that's what you want for them to give you references, but just like Aidan's point, be careful what you get or the validity of them. You might ask, you know, could you please list any collaborators or partnerships that you've developed over the last few years and call one of them. It's probably better that way. Yeah. There's no gray area then. You just pick up the phone and call somebody. You're probably gonna know somebody at the other place too, so. It's the advantage of living in a small town, right? Yeah. Okay. And so, the other line that was in this newspaper article that ends up with the community benefit thing is that remember that the contribution to the reserves is a key factor that you cannot forget when you adjudicate. So when you talk about community benefit and however Wayne and you guys are gonna put your matrix together, that's gonna be an important part. It's written throughout the documents in different ways. Which I think is why this all started in the first place, isn't it? It's about the reserve
Ma'am.
and the need to do that.
100%.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, I was in a work meeting this morning. I'm retired, but I still do other things. And the way that somebody started that meeting this morning was, what's the buzzword of today? And everybody, bar none, said the same thing. It's affordability. That is the word that every age is dealing with, everybody, working, non-working, retired, doesn't matter. Affordability. I didn't look at the gas prices today, but on the weekend it was 185.9, not bad enough. So we have to keep that in mind when you're in an elected position, is affordability. And so that's why your comment in the paper, they're gonna keep that forever, Tom.
But they did.
No, it's a good one. It's a good one. It's all about contribute to municipal building reserves.
Mhm.
And that's why affordability, everybody talks about all the time. Because like I said earlier, when the garbage bags and stuff cost more, so you have to be treading carefully when you're making decisions around taxation and the reserves, so. Yeah, I just wanna make sure, I thought a lot about all of this, so we've gone over the, primary service is the number one criteria that's listed in the 5. So primary service has to be demonstrable public benefits. I think we've touched on that. And I was trying to think of examples, but Nakusp is pretty well covered. Like we've got almost every sector covered. There's all kinds of projects and programs available, so it'll be great to see what people come up with when they write a proposal to find something that isn't already done, or, yeah, that's going to be interesting. And anybody, I couldn't come up with any ideas that makes money, so I looked at a few communities and I just thought, okay, one's doing a drop-in. Well, people can drop in all kinds of places, but you can't keep a building open 24/7 or even 8 hours a day for that. Some people do brown bag lunches in a public building. So people who work in an office, they really don't want to sit at their desk and they can't afford to go out and eat. So they all collectively go somewhere and they rent a place and they all huddle together and have their lunch hour together. And that's kind of cool. But who's going to pay for that? There's a cost there. So then they may as well just go out for lunch. So, coming up with ideas to is going to be a tough one. And there was one town that they do a baby clothes swap. Well, you can't do that every day. There's only so many onesies to share. So it is a challenge for a nonprofit in the cusp to find a little niche that's not being handled that they can afford to do. So good luck. That's all I wrote myself this morning was good luck. What isn't done already? Okay, the other issue in the, I think we touched on it, was the broad demographic. And so, when you talk about putting value on that one, make sure they're inclusive. We talked about the membership lists might not just be enough. There are some, group nonprofits in the area that don't even charge for a membership. So, all you gotta do is get 100 of your friends but that's not gonna be enough, people have to have, what's the word that all funders use? Skin in the game. People gotta have skin in the game. Somehow or other. Let me just go through here and make sure I don't miss anything. So when you asked about, a community benefit, the few good examples that I did think about that are in place everywhere would be a library. Now, obviously, these are not proposals you're going to see, but this gives you an idea of what would be deemed a community benefit, would be a library that offers a variety of services, computer services, things like that, as well as books, art galleries, venues for musical and theater. That would be a community benefit. You don't go every time there's a concert or a showing, but it's there, you go, or you go to the next one, but they're there for the community. And they've had to come up with their budgets to achieve that kind of sustainability. So that just gives you an idea of what a community benefit could look like. Okay, the next criteria item is that you don't want anything to compete with an existing business unless they're doing something very different. They're providing a similar service or good, but in a very different way. Sounds like that could never happen, but it does. And quite often you'll see that coming forward from a social enterprise, which is a private business that's deliberately operating as a social sector board of governors, but it's a private business. And you would treat them as a market. You would treat that within the market rent part of your policy. It would not be seen as a non-profit minimal rent because it is a business still. And, under that particular criteria, you have to consider the businesses that we have already. It's really easy for one to get hurt even by a nonprofit. So you just have to be really careful when you evaluate that, you know, does it step over the line and really affect another business, even though they do it differently? That happens now and then, and you want to make sure to avoid that. And I think your contribution agreement, that your lease agreement that you do will address that. So that if you start to see negative impacts of a decision that you made in good faith, shows not so good in a year, that you can review that. I would recommend that actually, just in case, you know. I think that's what we always did at the trust, was you could get a 5-year, but you'd report back every year, just so that it supports that nonprofit more than it helps the funder. It's just to make sure that all those terms are being met, because what can happen with a nonprofit all too often is they get deep into a hole and they don't want to let anybody know, you know, and they get so in a pickle and it just gets worse and worse. So when they can meet with whoever a funder on a regular basis, then things get caught right away and good advice is given, and they either say, I'm done, I'm gonna walk away, repay the money, I've had to do that, you know, or whatever circumstance, and that's okay. At least you give them a chance to succeed, or let them go so they don't get worse off. Because if you go with nonprofits, you're going to have to be really sensitive to how difficult it is these days for them. And if they're pulling funding from supportive and seniors housing, who knows how tight budgets are going to get provincially and federally. You have to assume it's going to continue for some time. So try hard not to put a nonprofit in a hard situation. If they're relying on project money to get by, then hopefully the budget will show that there is still money to pay a lease, because triple net's not going to be cheap, even if it's triple net plus $10 minimal fee, minimal lease. You're still looking at what a homeowner basically is going to be paying, and it's, you know, I don't know if project funds, and there aren't too many funders. In fact, I don't know of any that funds operational costs. So these are tough times.
Mhm.
So just be aware when you look at the proposals that it probably isn't going to get better out there for funding. So hopefully, maybe use that word sustainability when you do a proposal call, because it makes a nonprofit think about that, deliberately think about that. You know, yeah.
So if, I'm going to phrase this properly, if you have a nonprofit and they're not actually doing, like they're planning on doing more in the future.
Right.
So when they're proposing to you, they're not doing A or B, but they're planning on doing A and B. And then when you have 1-year review, they haven't met that benchmark.
Okay.
How do you address that? Like,
Well, it depends how little they've done, you know? I think when you draft up a lease agreement and in there are going, you know, what I always say when I help people write grants is whatever you write in there, the funder translates that, copies and pastes it into the agreement. And you're gonna end up doing something very similar, I would guess, to make sure you're all in agreement with what they've promised to do. So, if you feel that it's a relatively new nonprofit, hasn't got that much history with project work, or you're not sure that they can pull it off in that first year, then give them a 6-month and a 6 months. Think, you know, give them a little more time, because you don't have to pay it all. You don't, you know, if you're not giving them a grant. So, you know, you might say, well, we'll not ask you to pay this month, you will have to pay next month. That's a tricky one, but, and I wouldn't recommend it,
No.
but they'll ask for that. So you have to be prepared to say, no, but we'll give you an extension on something else. But yeah, I would just call them more frequently if you're not sure. Because something new is different than having an existing project or program come your way. because there's no history.
For sure.
And then if it is something new, you can request benchmarks. You know, how are they? Do they have names that you can call so that you can confirm that that funder, because they have to be operating with some funds from somewhere, you know? So then you can open that door and talk to their funder and say, look, you know, we don't want to set this group up, because that's what you're hoping to avoid, is to not set anybody up to fail.
Mhm.
You want to set them up to succeed.
Yeah.
So you can call their
Mhm.
funder with their permission or without, depends on what it was for. Yeah, don't be afraid of checking, because you don't
Yeah.
want anybody to fail.
Right.
Funders do that all the time. You get a tough skin. You know, you've got to ask the tough questions but you may not enter into a lease until they're halfway ready. You don't have to do it right away when the proposal is accepted,
Fair
So-
enough.
right?
That's a good point.
So give them 6 months. You know, we've chosen you, we're gonna hold it for you, whatever that is. Come back in 6 months with the more detailed,
If there's no
if
deliverables.
there's nothing there, then you can rethink it. That's what I would probably think of
That's good.
doing.
Good advice.
Similar question, what if none of the proposals are meet this threshold of community benefit?
Then you don't go there.
Right.
You just don't.
Right.
Because you are ultimately responsible to the residents. That's
Mhm.
what I mean about maximum benefit. So you don't have to choose anything. You know, I've sat through federal heritage grants and there wasn't one that met the criteria. And we had to say, oh, we'll have to do it again in a year.
We
And the
don't
money
have that
sat there.
luxury, though.
No, but you have an alternative.
We do.
I guess. So you just bounce back to your
Yeah.
alternative, you know, yeah. No, you can't. You're representing, you got voted in, you're representing the residents. You have to just say, no, none of them meet the criteria. It is what we put together already. You're coming at it from a criteria-based adjudication. Just don't take something that isn't gonna work for everybody. And you don't feel bad about it because you can't set a nonprofit up to fail. But that's really what would happen if you took somebody that didn't fit the criteria. Yeah. And that's the hard part of being on the granting side. You hate those phone calls, you know, but you gotta do them. That's where that book comes in handy.
We're all gonna download it tonight.
Oh, yeah, I'll send you a link.
Okay.
There's many books, I tell you. It's the only time I went to a self-help line. And it wasn't the psychology of being a good person, it's all this other stuff. How do you deal with, you know, mad people? Okay, so we talked about, I think the criteria number 4 was the identifying the gap and the need in the community. Sometimes, you know, it's not a new thing that somebody is proposing to do in one of your properties, but it's so different, you know, that you go, maybe we should give that a try, but let's confirm with the competing people, because they're, you know, that it's not going to affect their business. And if they agree, we look at that. And if not, they can pay market rent. That's simple. That's a simple one.
And we don't care about competition if they're paying market rent.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I agree.
Yeah, no, because again, it has to come back to, one of the goals is maximum benefit to taxpayers and to contribute to the reserves. So, and, we're not the only community dealing with lack of reserves and lack of enough money to fix. I mean, I came here from Prince Rupert and I was just up there for Hubaye, which is the annual Niska New Year. And they're just so excited. They're doing a different happy dance for the fact that their old water lines, their pipes are gonna get some money to, because the pipes would blow up all the time, right in front of your house. You know, they just corrode and gone, you know, and they'd freeze and you'd skate to work. But yeah, so I mean, every community, I think across Canada has been dealing with infrastructure gaps and reserve money, so yeah, we can't forget that. And the fifth part of the criteria was that the service that's going to be provided in these proposals are for Nakusp residents primarily. Now, that doesn't mean that a nonprofit from somewhere else could apply, fill out a proposal, and be the provider of services only to Nakusp. I doubt that that would happen, because you're not gonna be posting it everywhere. But if it did, it would be eligible, right? Doesn't say it can't, as long as the service provided is for Nakusp residents.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. I just wanna make sure that I haven't missed anything. So, just to clarify that the leases will be triple net plus the $10 minimal fee for an accepted nonprofit proposal. So it's still gonna be a significant amount. That's why looking at the budget and making sure the nonprofit is sustainable is an important part of your adjudication. It could be the most important part. Even though I said earlier, community benefit, that it won't benefit the community if they can't pay the bill. So, you know, when I was working in the downtown east side as a social worker in the 80s, worked with Jim Green, and we were trying to find ways to repurpose the Woodward's building. Fun and games. So what you're doing here is like that in a very small way. You know, is trying to get big value for a community. And there we had to try to sell it to the whole of Vancouver, but it was the downtown east side. Who wants to invest there? Well, we did. It just took some creative thinking, and Jim Green is kind of a bully creative thinker. So, but it can be done, is why I bring it up. So even that one was a dicey project at the time, and look at it now, it's great. Yeah, so I think I've hit the main points that had me up at night thinking about this meeting and what you wanted to get out of it. I think I've shared the important bits. I think, any other questions? I'm trying really hard to make sure you're not up all night.
That was really helpful.
Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
If you wake up at 2 a.m, don't call me, but write it down and give it to
We'll just
Wayne
text
and
you.
he'll, yeah, text me. If you do come up with a different kind of question or something that we hadn't thought about, just reach out. I've just tried to keep it to the points in the criteria in everything. One of the things that's really hard is managing expectations of a nonprofit. And you just have to, I don't know if you plan on meeting with the proponents after they deliver their proposals or anything like that. We don't know how many you're gonna get. But be wise to look at it from a managing expectations that they have. Because again, the typical nonprofit is always, we can do this. And money and whatever says, nah, you can do this, so, yeah. And the other recommendation I would have is when you get your proposals in, I would say council should tour those properties, whatever they are, buildings, land, whatever you're going to get in. Go and have a look at them now with the lens of this group and what they want to do in it. Because what you think can be done in a building and then what you read on a proposal, there might be some conflicts of what you understand the building can accommodate. So I would recommend that. You do own them, so you just arrange to go through and have a tour. Okay, even if it's being occupied and it's not their proposal, doesn't matter, just make an arrangement when they're not there, or don't get in their way and stuff, but please go have a look, because you can't, that's one of the hardest things about adjudicating grants from Ottawa is you don't see the buildings, you don't meet the people, it's trickier, but here you've got the luxury of, probably knowing of people, if you don't know them personally, but you know the building, but now you got to see inside. Or think of that land, whatever whatever the item is. Okay, let me just make sure. Yeah, we talked about it's better to have it empty and say no than I think we hit everything. Oh, yes, Jean.
I'm just wondering if you can suggest, do we assign precedence to people who have previously used the space? Is there any validity to saying, well, we've done this for,
No, not really, not based on the criteria in your own policy, no. No. Now, when you ask about what's your history as a nonprofit, it might come up, but it can't be a determining factor. Because it wouldn't be fair to all the others that are just as good, but haven't, you know what I mean, hasn't got the history in that location. The secret to a fair adjudication is just to be fair, is, stick to the criteria. That's why it's there. It's just there and stick to it. Sometimes I've sat that the provincial adjudication committees are the toughest ones because they tend to be people who have been around the different communities in the province. And so they have personal feelings. Maybe they've lived there, maybe they got a family there. And at the end, they filled out their little matrix. And then all of a sudden you can see their numbers and then they go, yeah, I don't want it funded. Nope. Well, you liked it before when you read everything. Yeah, but my son said, and so you've got to keep that personal thinking out. It's a very rigid adjudication process when you do grants or proposals of any kind. I'm sure you do this when you have procurement and you're choosing contractors for the village. It's the same kind of mindset. You just, it has to be defendable 100% by not thinking that way. Yeah, it's easier for you
I
to.
guess the reason I'm asking the question is, in some cases, there's been time, energy, money, grants, volunteerism put
Yeah.
into a space to make it what it is presently.
Yeah.
And so, I know there has been a request to take that into account.
It's not in the criteria. And the policy was adopted in 2025. I'm sure that I could come up with 10 different reasons to provide extra bonus points to certain groups or in any town, but I would never go there.
Mhm.
Because the past is the past. You're looking at 4 or 5 years in the future. And I think you need to really focus on that. I mean,
If I could just bring up one thing, and that's about the whole issue of why it's a 5-year lease, why
Okay.
it's not longer than a
Oh,
5-year
right.
lease.
isn't that a
And
community charter or something? Go
yeah,
ahead and detail it. for
so
me.
the community charter actually limits how long we can create an agreement that puts the community at a cost. So for example, providing a space below market rent or not collecting adequate funding to be able to maintain the building, that's putting the taxpayer at a financial disadvantage. So that's why it has to be a 5-year lease.
5 years.
Anything more than 5 years, you are able to do that. However, it must go to a referendum. And
Yeah.
the public has to come back and agree to that
Yeah.
before you can carry on with, before you can agree to an agreement that's more
Yeah.
than 5 years.
That's
Five
right.
years would-
Yeah. And even after a referendum of any type of question, the village isn't
That's
they don't even have to go with the vote anyway.
Yeah, council
Correct.
can still say no.
That's right.
Yeah, the only thing the council can't disagree with in a referendum is if the electorate has said that they disagree with loaning, borrowing money.
Yeah.
And just for context, community
Yeah.
charter is the provincial legislation by which we operate.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then
Have
there's.
legitimacy as a government.
that's correct.
I remember when it changed and there was quite a kerfuffle and they went and toured the province. And some of my friends were MLAs at the time and woo-hoo, it was some interesting conversations. Because one of the MLAs had been an NDP and I remember going to lobby in Dawson Creek but it was an NDP riding and I never belonged to any party. I've always had public work and even in the private sector, it's best not to be affiliated. So anyway, I had to go and lobby for a transition house in Chetwynd. So I went to Dawson Creek anyway, and I knew it was just insider anyway. And I remember he called me sister so that he could give me the floor, because that would be Blair. We used to ride our Harleys together, but anyway. So then he changed parties and he got under Gordon Campbell's spell. He wouldn't mind me telling this story. I would just owe him a bottle of rum. And, and he had to go to Trail and he came here and he went all over as part of the Liberal, you know, the provincial Liberal government's, task force on asset management, basically, and hospitals and all of that. And after that, I think he went back to Dawson Creek and became the mayor. He did enough. So, you know, it is tough, but though that's the year when those talks were being held, Aiden, was the change to the Local Government Act / brought in the community charter, and not all local governments were happy with it. Some wanted more control, more decision-making authority, and some did not. So, yeah. Yeah. So here we are with what we got now. And I think it's worked out well in the end. So I think, looks like everybody's okay. You okay with what you figured out here, Tom?
I sleep on it a lot.
Yeah,
Think about it.
okay. Should I turn off my phone?
I don't have your phone numbers.
Yeah, but no, please do it through Wayne if you like, but if you've got any other questions that come to mind, you know, because you want to get this one right. You know, it's been months in the making and you're just about there now, ready to put out a call. So it's the language in that proposal call that's gonna be really helpful. Okay. Yeah? Okay, I'm gonna let you go, because you had meetings before and some of you haven't eaten and,
Thank you.
yeah,
It was really.
but I think we hit the main points.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, Linda,
Oh, you're welcome.
finding the time.
Yeah. Happy to help.
Yeah, we all really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Well, you know, I've been around and done these different kind of jobs and you learn, you just keep learning. And you don't always get it right, but you learn enough to share with somebody else. So let's try to avoid tricky situations.
Much appreciated.
No, I'm always kicking it, I'm not always.